You're walking through a forest. Pine needles crunch underfoot. The air smells different here, cleaner, sharper, almost medicinal, and your body is responding in ways you can't see. What if the prescription for better health wasn't in a bottle? What if it was measured in minutes, spent under trees, near water, surrounded by green? Researchers asked a simple question: how much time in nature does it take to actually make a difference? The answer they found was surprisingly specific. 2 hours, 120 minutes per week, that's the threshold. Below it, no measurable benefit. Above it, something shifts. But here's what makes this really interesting. The benefits aren't just psychological. Trees are releasing compounds that physically alter your immune system. In Japan, they call it shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. The practice began in the 1980s as a form of nature therapy, but what started as philosophy became science. Researchers began measuring what happens inside the human body when we spend time among trees. Not just how we feel, but what changes at the cellular level. The findings would challenge everything we thought we knew about the relationship between nature and human health. In 2019, the University of Exeter published a landmark study, nearly 20,000 people across England. One simple question: how much time do you spend in nature each week? The results were striking. People who spent at least 120 minutes per week in nature reported significantly better health and psychological well-being. But here's the part that surprised everyone. For people who spent less than 2 hours per week outdoors, no significant benefits at all. It wasn't a gradual curve. It was a threshold, a minimum effective dose. Below that line, nature exposure didn't register as meaningful. The researchers tested whether this applied to everyone: age, gender, income level, existing health conditions. The threshold held across all groups. Even people with long-term illnesses or disabilities showed the same pattern. 2 hours appeared to be the universal minimum for measurable benefit, and the benefits peaked somewhere between 200 and 300 minutes weekly. Beyond that, no additional gains. More wasn't necessarily better. So the threshold exists. But why? What's actually happening inside your body when you spend time in natural environments? This is where the science gets genuinely surprising, because trees aren't just passive backdrops. They're releasing invisible compounds that your immune system actually responds to. Trees produce volatile organic compounds called phytoncides. These chemicals serve as natural defense mechanisms, protecting trees from insects and disease. The primary compounds are alpha-pinene and limonene. When you walk through a forest, especially an evergreen forest, you're breathing these molecules in with every breath. Japanese researchers discovered that these phytoncides don't just smell pleasant. They actually increase the activity of natural killer cells in your bloodstream. Natural killer cells are exactly what they sound like. They're white blood cells that patrol your body, hunting for cells infected by viruses, or cells that have become cancerous. In one study, participants went on a 3-day forest bathing trip. Researchers measured their NK cell activity before, during, and after. The results showed significant increases in NK cell activity, the number of NK cells circulating, and this is key, intracellular anti-cancer proteins. And here's what made researchers sit up. Those elevated NK cell levels persisted. For at least 7 days after the forest exposure ended, the phytoncides weren't just triggering a temporary response. They were reprogramming immune cells to express higher levels of perforin, granzyme A, and granulysin proteins that destroy compromised cells. A 2026 comprehensive review confirmed these findings across multiple studies. Forest bathing is associated with enhanced NK cell activity and shifts toward parasympathetic nervous system dominance. That parasympathetic shift matters. It means your body is moving from fight or flight mode into rest and digest mode. Stress hormones drop. Recovery accelerates. Multiple studies have measured cortisol, the primary stress hormone before and after forest exposure. The pattern is consistent. Cortisol drops significantly. A systematic review and meta-analysis found that cortisol levels were lower after forest exposure in nearly every study examined, all but 2. So we have 2 separate bodies of research converging. The Exeter study showing a threshold of time, the forest bathing research showing specific biological mechanisms. The question becomes practical. How do you actually meet that 2-hour weekly threshold? And does it need to be in a forest specifically? The Exeter research offers good news here. The benefits came from any natural setting: parks, woodlands, beaches, even urban green spaces. It didn't have to be wilderness. And the 120 minutes could be accumulated across multiple visits. You don't need a single 2-hour block. Several shorter sessions work equally well. Now, I should be clear about the limitations here. This is observational research. Healthier people might naturally spend more time outdoors. We can't prove the nature causes the benefit. The forest bathing studies use small sample sizes, and the mechanisms are still being untangled. Is it the phytoncides, the physical activity, the stress reduction, or some combination? Researchers emphasize that more rigorous trials are needed to strengthen causal claims. This is promising evidence, not proven medicine. That said, the evidence is compelling enough to consider practical application, and this is a conversation worth having with your healthcare provider. Based on the research, you might consider aiming for at least 120 minutes of nature exposure weekly. That's roughly 17 minutes a day, or 4 30-minute walks. If you have access to forested areas, particularly evergreen forests with pine, cedar, or cypress, the phytoncide research suggests these may offer additional immune-supporting exposure. Morning nature exposure may be particularly valuable. It supports cortisol regulation and circadian rhythm, though any time of day that works for your schedule counts. Some researchers suggest leaving your phone behind or switching to airplane mode. The goal is genuine disconnection, letting your nervous system fully shift into that parasympathetic state. And if wilderness isn't accessible, the research suggests urban parks and green spaces still count towards your time. You don't need a national forest, just some trees and grass. There's something both humbling and hopeful about this research. We evolved surrounded by nature, and our bodies still respond to it in measurable ways. For most of human history, the question of nature exposure didn't exist. We lived in it. The idea of scheduling 2 hours weekly would have seemed absurd. Now we have research telling us what our ancestors knew intuitively. Time in natural environments isn't a luxury. It may be a biological requirement we've been neglecting. So here's a thought. Look at your calendar this week. Where could 120 minutes come from? A morning walk? A weekend hike? Lunch in the park? The research suggests even imperfect nature exposure. Urban parks, backyard gardens, tree-lined streets may contribute to your weekly total. Perfect isn't the goal. Consistent is. If you found this useful, subscribe. We explore evidence-based health research like this every week, and the like helps others find their way here too. The mechanisms are still being studied, but the pattern the research points to is worth paying attention to and worth discussing with your doctor. 2 hours per week. That's the threshold the largest study found. It's not a prescription, but it might be a starting point for a conversation about how we structure our lives. The trees are doing their part. They've been releasing those compounds for millions of years. The question is whether we'll make time to receive what they're offering. Talk to your healthcare provider. Consider your own threshold. And maybe, just maybe, schedule some time among the trees. Your immune system might thank you for it. Every breath you take in a forest carries invisible passengers, molecules that evolved over millions of years. And your body, it recognizes them. Scientists are calling it nature as medicine, not as a metaphor, as a measurable, quantifiable intervention with specific dose-response relationships. Your natural killer cells are your body's surveillance system. They patrol constantly, looking for anything that doesn't belong. Virus-infected cells, precancerous cells. When you breathe in forest air rich with phytoncides, these NK cells increase in number. They increase in activity, and they express more of the proteins they need to do their job. The stress reduction component may matter equally. Chronic stress suppresses immune function. Nature exposure appears to reset that balance. The parasympathetic shift that forest bathing triggers, that rest and digest state, creates conditions for repair, for recovery, for the immune system to function optimally. For those managing chronic health conditions, this research offers a potentially valuable conversation starter with your care team. Nature exposure as a complementary approach. Consider starting small. Even 10 minutes daily in a local park builds the habit. The evidence suggests you might increase duration as nature time becomes routine. The forest doesn't care about your deadlines. The trees don't know about your inbox. And maybe that's exactly why your nervous system responds the way it does. Research continues to explore optimal conditions. Which tree species produce the most phytoncides? What time of day offers peak exposure? How weather affects concentrations? But while the details get refined, the broad pattern is clear. Time in nature, real, unplugged, embodied time, appears to matter for human health. Next time you find yourself with a free half hour, you might consider stepping outside, not as a workout, not as productivity, just as a way of giving your body what it seems to need. 120 minutes per week, that's the number from the largest study. It's not magic, it's a pattern in the data that holds across populations. Track your nature time for a week. Just notice, are you above the threshold or below it? That awareness alone might shift how you structure your days. The research team at Exeter emphasized this isn't about wilderness expeditions. Your local park counts. A tree-lined street counts. Any natural setting where you're present and engaged. There's an accessibility story here too. You don't need expensive gear or distant travel. You need a place with trees, some time, and the willingness to be present. The evidence keeps accumulating, the mechanisms are becoming clearer, and the prescription, if we can call it that, remains remarkably simple. Go outside. Stay a while. Let the trees do their work. Remember, this content is for informational purposes only and is consult your doctor.